think we should get started. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. We're really grateful that you chose to spend part of this spectacular morning with us today, one that feels like we skipped some spring and went right to summer. Thank you for the generosity that you continue to bring to this community. Before I introduce our presenters, let's go over a few housekeeping items. We have muted all attendees to optimize the audio experience. We will have an opportunity likely to come off mute at the end when we go through questions. Closed captioning is available. You'll see on the slide that that's instructional on how to activate that on your end. We will be recording the session as well. And we have ample time planned for questions at the end. So we ask that you can submit your questions via chat to Jennifer throughout the presentation and at the end, and we'll be happy to answer those. One little note is there's a little plus when you go into chat. There's a little start new chat. It's a plus button. Please take a look for that if you're having trouble finding that function. So now I'd like to introduce our presenters. First, Jennifer Heath, our president and CEO. Many of you know Jennifer very well. And we're really excited that this month, Jennifer is celebrating her 20th anniversary with the United Way. So thank you, Jennifer, for 2 decades of steady leadership and commitment to improving lives. And to help ground this conversation in both strategy and impact, joining Jennifer is Kelly Fitzgerald, our Vice President of Financial Security. Kelly brings both compassion and clarity as she leads United Way's work that many of you help make possible, supporting families at risk of housing loss and financial crisis and strengthening the systems that help move them towards stability. So now I'll hand it over to Jennifer.
Maria, thank you. And I will just say I joked a little bit with the staff that it's a good thing I started here when I was 6 years old. Today we're gonna talk a lot about
webinar.
We're gonna talk a lot about affordability, and really want to highlight or underscore the fact that this is the issue that really undergirds all that we're going to talk about today. The fact that prices are such right now that they are not, people's wages are not matching the price increases, and that's really causing the hardship that we're seeing in our community. And you're going to hear a lot more about what that actually looks like on the ground and data from Kelly as she gets us started. But I wanted to really start us off talking about a real person, because I think when we see charts and graphs and talk about data and percentages, sometimes it's really helpful to start off thinking about how this impacts a real person in our community. So I wanted to introduce you to Mercedes. Mercedes is a single mom of 4. She lives right here in Greater New Haven. And her partner, the children's father, passed away a couple of years ago. So she is raising 4 kids on her own. She's also working. She is working as a lab assistant. She is making more than minimum wage. And she says she is still struggling to make ends meet. Cool. She's also trying to finish her bachelor's degree. She's so close. But she talks about the fact that with 4 kids and with a job and all the balancing that requires, finishing school feels like it's out of reach right now. She says, despite her job, which she says it is not a minimum wage job, she still feels like she is just struggling to survive. She's really thankful for the help that the community has surrounded her with. She has been able to get low cost and no cost childcare through United Way and United Way partners. She has had help with toys and clothing for her children. And when SNAP benefits were delayed in the fall, she benefited from financial assistance to make sure she could get food to her kids. And with all of that, doing everything right, she is still struggling. And so as we talk about the challenges that people are facing today, if it helps to have a picture of a real person, one of our neighbors, I want you to think about Mercedes. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I always appreciate being able to ground ourselves in stories like Mercedes, because the reality is this is more than data, right? And stories and conversation. These are real people. These are our neighbors. And what I really look forward to today is being able to have a conversation with you all to share, what are we seeing? What does affordability and the issues tied to affordability look like for families in Greater New Haven? And so when we talk about this, we're talking about the gap between what families earn and what it actually costs. We're talking about basic needs of food and housing, but it also shows up with childcare, transportation, and healthcare. And unfortunately, as we're about to walk through, you're going to see that the gap is widening quickly and families are really running out of places to absorb the growing costs. Let me go to the next slide. So starting with, there's a lot of spaces, as I just mentioned, around affordability that we could focus on. But in terms of where we're seeing the highest need in the community, and also the space that we're really focused in Greater New Haven, we do think about basic needs of food and housing. And one thing that we're seeing in the data here that you'll see is that food insecurity is growing. And it's growing at higher rates for families with young children and in New Haven. So you'll see statewide, 16% of families are reporting food insecurity, and in New Haven, that's 24%. What you're also seeing, I think this is something that we all experience when we're going to the grocery store every day, is food costs are rising significantly. So in the last 4 years, we're seeing food costs increase by 25%. And again, this is an area where when you are already at a point where you are trying to figure out where you are going to be able to make ends meet, as costs rise so significantly, there's really just no space for people to pull from to be able to cover those costs. And this helps explain why food pantries, school meal programs, emergency supports, and others are seeing an increased demand because of these costs. Now, shifting slightly out of food, but into housing, still talking about around basic needs, is homelessness. This is a topic that I think people see the most in the news when we're talking about the housing crisis in the country, in Connecticut, and in Greater New Haven. And really, the kind of like the key point in terms of the slide that you see in front of you now is the drastic increase that you see in the last 8 years. In particular, from 2021 on, you're seeing a significant increase in homelessness. In terms of self-report, we're seeing people are reporting that affordability is the #1 reason why they're entering the homeless response system. And just to, remind us, people are not suddenly less responsible. Housing is simply just unattainable for families. To dig a little bit deeper into that, you can see here that when we look at rent versus wages, that the average rent in Greater New Haven increased 77% in the last 10 years. But when you look at wages, we only see a 34% increase. And again, when you're looking at these numbers, you're also looking at it based on as if rent is the only expense that a family has in any given month. So even if your wage were to increase at the same amount, the reality is everything, all the costs are rising. And so wages are just not able to keep up with the rents. And again, this is local. This is Greater New Haven data. And so we're talking about our neighbors. So this is a little bit of data to ground ourselves because the work that we do really is looking at what are we seeing in the data, but what are we also seeing on the ground? What are nonprofit partners, municipalities, and family themselves sharing and talking with us? And so I think the data just is really aligns with that and just reinforces that what we're hearing is based on real impacts that are happening. So what is this showing us? And what are the added pressures? So we can say, okay, costs are rising, and there is a lot more layered into this. The reality is, and I mentioned this already, that families are already living on the edge. Wages and public benefits are not keeping up with the rising costs. So when we're talking about rental assistance, if we're talking about SNAP benefits, the reality is, in whether you're talking about inflation and others, those resources and benefits are not able to keep up with those rising costs. And for families who were once able to make it work, just can't keep up. At the same time, we're seeing the federal investment shrinking. The Emergency Food and Shelter Program, which has been around for many years, in the last 2 years has been cut. That was critical resources that was going into our region. United Way supported in getting that out into the community. That has been cut. We've seen very publicly, I think everyone has seen the impact of SNAP related cuts around eligibility, but then also the amount that families are getting, and then increased work requirements. So ultimately, we're seeing a higher need, fewer resources, and what inevitably does that mean is deeper instability for families in our community. I wanted to pause for a minute to talk about the employment side of things. I think I've shared in a few different ways that we are talking about working families who are still struggling. And with this administration, there has been significant emphasis on helping families get back into work. And wanting to flag on that it's making a big assumption that people aren't already working. But then also, what does it look like to actually obtain employment that would help you keep up with the cost? And so we are fully supportive. United Way for years has been working to help families imagine what a career could look like for them, access supports, and able to obtain those. But the reality is that the requirements and the number of people that are going to be pushed into accessing more employment and resources, the system's not there in the capacity that it needs to. So again, workforce support, we want to be helping people get there, but we need to be supporting that system. In some of our convening work that we do, we've been bringing together workforce providers and even just getting a baseline. How many people can you serve? And there are not nearly enough employment supports in our community than the number of people that are going to be needing them. Another piece about employment is that even when people are able to obtain employment, sometimes it just pushes them to a point that there's this moment in time where it actually feels worse. And we call that the benefits cliff. That's when someone's earning slightly more, but then any benefits that they were receiving start to disappear, right? And so there's this push and pull for families about knowing that employment is the long-term solution, but how do we respond in a moment when I now no longer have the healthcare, the child care, and other expenses covered? I want to go to the next slide. So what are we doing about this? A lot. I want to remind us that I'm really proud to be at United Way of Greater New Haven, but also part of just the Greater New Haven community, because there is so much commitment across the board for people to come together to understand what's happening, but then figure out how do we make really scalable change within our community. So focusing on the immediate, we want to look at any issue of how can we help someone today, but how can we ensure that it's not an issue tomorrow and it's not an issue for someone else in the future. And so to start, in terms of responding to the immediate crisis, we are deploying community navigators out in through our 12-town footprint to really be there for community members who are in a crisis. Where do I go? Because as we're seeing with homelessness and other areas, there are people who have never been faced with this situation before and really don't know how to navigate what's out there, what's the, how to get the most out of their time. And so our community navigators have been a really critical resource to support someone in a moment of need to get them where they need to go and to address whatever crisis they're facing. Another example is our Neighbors United initiative, which many of you hopefully are aware of. But when situations like a government shutdown and families not receiving their SNAP benefits, how do we help ensure that people are able to access immediate financial assistance to get them through? That might be food, that could be rent, electricity, and more. And then the other piece I'd want to highlight is our coordinated access network support, which is helping households who are at the door of homelessness. How do we help alleviate that crisis so that you don't have to come into the homeless response system? And if you do, how do we help move you into housing as quickly as possible so that you're not experiencing homelessness for long? Again, this work prevents short-term crises from becoming long-term emergencies. In terms of midterm strategies, this is really where I want to highlight our coordination and collaboration work that we do. Many people don't understand, but it is a system of eligibility and process and different steps to take to access anything, right? Whether you're talking about food, housing, and more. And United Way is really committed to bringing all of those partners together to strengthen those systems. We right now convene networks around food insecurity, around housing and homelessness, workforce development, school-aged youth, and more. But those tables allow us to track real-time trends, understanding what's happening on the ground, identify gaps so that we're able to work together to resolve them, as well as coordinate smarter responses to situations as they come up. Another piece of this is engaging community members to share lived experiences. So we're going to be kicking off our Your Neighbor Alice initiative in the coming months. And really the goal of this is to help raise awareness and visibility of this issue. Really try to reduce stigma and help everybody see that we're all impacted by this in some way, some in higher degrees than others, but we're all in this together. And so how do we see each other in that way and support each other? So being able to share more stories of our neighbors and community members and giving them a space to share their story and their voice is really important. And then also direct resources into the community where they're needed. I mean, whenever there is a need, that could be piloting a new idea. It could be deploying state and other local resources. But how do we get resources into the community so that they're most effective? Lastly, I want to talk about our long-term work. This is it's not always feels shiny. It doesn't happen overnight, but really is where we see the ability to have scalable impact for our community. And really this is around policy and advocacy. So one way that we try, coming off of our neighbor Alice, talking about that, how are we informing and advocating policies that reduce poverty and instability for families? One example of that is the child tax credit. We'll talk in a little bit of an opportunity that you guys can actually do something today on that. But there are proven strategies that other states are already doing that we think it's time that Connecticut is. And so how can United Way be elevating the stories and the information of our local community so that Connecticut can be adopting some of these strategies that, again, proven strategies to move families out of poverty? The other thing is, advocating at local, state, federal levels to ensure that today's realities, that systems reflect today's realities and not yesterday's economy. We do so much work with our nonprofit partners who, I think it used to be people thought of it as they're doing God's work, right? But the work takes commitment, it takes skill, and it takes coordination that at the end of the day costs money. And nonprofits have not been supported to do this work at the level of the growing cost. I mean, we talk about growing costs for the individual. I think nonprofits are in the same situation. And so in order to have the impact that they want to have, how are we able to elevate what the real cost is of doing that? So just some of the examples of advocacy and policy work that we're engaging in order to bring in more resources and have a bigger impact in our community. So I'm going to turn it to Jennifer. That was a lot. So I'm going to also pause for a second, but turn it to Jennifer to talk about what's next, and then we can have some discussion.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. And yes, I'm going to go through the next couple of slides and get to the what we can all do in terms of taking action, and then definitely want to have conversation. So in terms of the what comes next, United Way, you can go on to the next slide. United Way is really reaffirming its commitment. We are in this work and we are committed to staying in this work. And that means, as Kelly highlighted, both deploying resources and also really working in partnership in ongoing and new ways to meet the moment that we're in right now. And we firmly believe as an organization, no one in our community should go hungry or lose their home because they cannot keep up with rising costs. And so we keep that as our North Star and are constantly looking for ways to make a difference, even though the need seems to be growing. Part of what that increased need means is that we need help from the whole community. And if you've been around United Way at all, which most of you have been for quite a while, you have heard us talk about that there are a lot of different ways to make a difference. You can donate, you can volunteer, and you can advocate. And all three of those make a big difference. And we wanted to give you some very specific examples of ways that you could take those from being kind of general terms into here's what I could do today or tomorrow. So you can see, and we've got things that fill in each of those kind of circles in terms of donating, volunteering, and advocating. You could join our volunteer email list. That's going to ensure that you get information on a regular basis about volunteer opportunities in the community. And I will tell you, many of those align directly with the issues we were talking about today around hunger, around food, and around housing. And there are others, but that way you'll see what's available and can sign up and get your hands literally dirty, because a lot of the work that's coming up is actually in community gardens and gardening. So you will actually get your hands dirty. You could get involved by learning more about what it's like to be in a low-income working household and facing the choices that folks have to make every day. And that's through our 30/30 experience. And our next one is actually coming up on May 5th. So that's something you can sign up for. It's a 90-minute online experience. Highly recommend. It's really eye-opening. We have a trike race coming up, which is specifically to raise money. That's a fundraising activity for us. And the proceeds from that go directly to our food insecurity work. It is also a ton of fun. You can see, I think, from the picture that you've got grown full-size adults riding child-sized tricycles, and it's a blast. It's great fun. So I highly encourage you to put together a team and come join us. You could donate to our Neighbors United Fund. We are continuing to raise funds there so that we can respond in times of crisis to people's immediate needs. We have a press event coming up. It's a community press event, and we're part of it. around homelessness on April 17th. That's at a shelter that's out on Fox and Boulevard. And there is a need to secure additional funding to make sure that that shelter can continue. In a time of increased homelessness, we cannot afford to have that shelter go offline. And then Kelly mentioned the child tax credit. We continue to push for that in this legislative session, and we have a tool that folks can go to on our website that makes it really easy for you to send a message to your own legislators asking them to support that child tax credit. So those are some very specific ways you could take action now, and we'd love to have you do all or any of those to help our neighbors. And I think with that, we are ready to open it up for questions. We actually got a couple of questions ahead of time. So I wanted to start with those while folks are thinking and sending ones in the chat. This question came from Allison, and it's what is one basic needs gap in Greater New Haven that you think is most overlooked? And what can this community do that would make a difference? Kelly, I wondered do you want to take a crack at that one?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Thanks, Allison, for submitting that. And you won't be surprised to hear the answer that I would give, but people are still shocked to hear that food insecurity is an issue in our community. And when we're talking about almost 25% of New Haven households, I think still just surprises a lot of people. And in terms of what we can do about that, I think the first is about raising awareness and understanding, helping people just kind of see the impact, and then get involved, right? Like how to help people, show up to whether it's dinner for $1 or the mobile food pantries. How are we helping people get out there and see that there are ways to impact it at the local level, as well as asking our cities and state to invest more? I mean, I think one of the reasons why I describe it as an overlooked is when we look at the need versus investment and just not, feeling that that's where we're getting as much attention as it needs.
Do you think it would be helpful? And I'm thinking on a local level, but do you think, because I think a lot of people don't know what it actually looks like to be food insecure. Would it be helpful for donors or people that want to volunteer to actually see what that looks like in an average family on a day-to-day, in a family that's experiencing that? What does that really look like when they go in the grocery store, when they open up their refrigerator, when they're budgeting what does that actually look like with actual people? Would you think that would be helpful as far as getting people to donate or getting people to be more aware or more involved?
I think it could be. I mean, Kelly, I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you gonna?
No, yeah.
I mean, I think so. I mean, it'd be interesting to hear from others actually on the call whether they think that would be impactful. I mean, I think the 30-30 experience gets into that to some degree in the sense of trying to help people understand the reality of the choices people have to make. It's not the same as like being able to open someone's refrigerator and see what's not there.
Right.
But it is very much that, like, are you going to get your car fixed, or are you going to pay down the credit card debt, or like these real choices that impact children and other family members.
Well, that 30-30 experience is really something everybody should do. I highly, highly recommend it. I even have volunteers who are well-meaning people, who are really good people who want to help, but don't really understand what it looks like. And so I've always wrestled with how do you communicate that to people so that they can really, really see what that is and maybe motivate them to be more involved, do more, spread the word, or whatever they can do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you.
Another question that came in ahead of time, this one was from Jen. is, does the New Haven area have either advantages or disadvantages to bear in mind when figuring out who needs what kind of help? And I might start off on answering this one and then I'll turn it over to Kelly. But Jen, I actually think in some ways our advantages and disadvantages are almost like two sides of the same coin a little bit, in that I think that New Haven in particular is blessed with a lot of social service organizations and services, which is an advantage, right? Because it means there are things available for people in need. I would say the flip side of that, I see kind of two disadvantages to that. One is it can make it harder for people to even know what's available or navigate, because there are just so many different things and you don't always know how to string it together, put it together to make it work for you, or even what all is available. And that's not just for people who are needing the services. That can be the case for people who are working in the sector and they don't even know everything that everybody else is doing. And so they can't necessarily be as helpful to the people they're serving, because they don't always know where to send them or what's available. The other issue I will just name is, because New Haven is an area rich in resources, there are people who come here from outside of our region to get those services. And, you know, we're not going to turn people away if they are coming from Waterbury or Hartford or Bridgeport or New York or, but it's, you know, it can be a little tricky because you want to make sure the services are available, and at times people come here because they know they're available, and it puts more strain on the system. Kelly, I don't know, would you say other things?
No, I think you said it perfectly. I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah. I don't know, Jen, does that get at the question, or feel free to come off mute if you want to.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I really appreciate about United Way is that because you have somewhat of an overview, I mean, you're in a great position to be able to coordinate those services. And that's one of the things, or at least, and I know you've had meetings with other nonprofits to talk about working together. And that's to me one of the, one of the reasons that I donate to United Way. And yeah, so, but yeah, New Haven is, I wouldn't say it's new, it has unique challenges and disadvantages too. So
Yeah.
But thank you.
Jennifer, the only thing I'd want to add, just hearing a little bit more of what Jen was thinking, is in terms of the collaboration and coordination work, one of our opportunities when we're bringing agencies together is to, as you said, like, what is the landscape? What are the resources? And how do we make the most impact? And so there's a lot of strategic planning and conversation around how do we use the resources in a way that gets to those that are most vulnerable, and has the longest impact. And so I think that work that we do really does help in us as a community having conversations to the part of the question of who needs the help, right? Because everybody needs help. And the reality is, like, there is just right now not enough for everybody. And so how do we address that? How do we make the most impact? And so I think that that's something that when we go to national conferences, we're always so hard on ourselves. Then we go to a national conference, we hear what others are doing, and then we're like, wow, okay. Like we're ahead of things. We're doing good, right? And I love that though, because we still want to do more. We still want to be better, and that's kind of what keeps us going.
We have two other questions that had come in. One was specifically around the homelessness and housing situation. So Kelly, I'm going to read the question and then I'll definitely turn it over to you. But so it's around, I'm paraphrasing just a little bit from what was written here, but it's around the fact that you talked about the homelessness numbers going up. Mm-hmm. And many people, I think, have heard about the need for more housing in our region and in our state. And that's like the long-term issue, right? I mean, it takes a while to build housing. So are there things that can be done right now or what's being done right now that's helping get more people connected to housing? Or is there stuff that can be done right now, given that it's this long-term demand supply issue?
Yeah. So in terms of the short term or more immediate focus, there's actually been a lot of work happening. And one thing I would talk about is how are we using flexible resources to address an immediate crisis before it becomes something more long term. So if someone's behind on their rent or they need to move to a new apartment and need security deposit, how are we able to meet that immediate need, right? So like that's one thing that we've been doing a lot of work on. Another is how are we supporting both landlords and tenants in understanding their rights tied to be like whether it comes to the eviction process or something else. There is a movement around just cause eviction that's really picking up in Connecticut. But how are we just helping people who are in rental units stay in those if that's an appropriate safe place for them to be? And then I would just add, how are we doing work with supporting landlords who are willing to negotiate rents or other things to allow a family to move in that otherwise wouldn't? So we've implemented strategies like a landlord mitigation fund that is there to support landlords and being willing to do that work.
Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah.
We had a comment I wanted to share with the group. This is from Bob Kreitler. Thank you, Bob. Suggesting that around the child care tax credit, reaching out to the governor's office, because not just legislators, because he's a big part of that equation. And so recommending to people to reach out to the governor's office. So thank you for that. Recommendation.
And I would just add in terms of the child tax credit, why that is an area, a strategy that we're so supportive of is because ultimately it puts money back in the pockets of families to do with as they need, right? I think that there are legislators that everyone wants to support families in alleviating costs, but others wanting to specifically do school meals or a different topic. And something like the child tax credit really puts the power back into the families to be able to decide where and how they need to spend their resources. So
yeah. Thank you. One other question that came in. This was about a suggestion of how could we come together to form a free CSA, a community supported agriculture project for those in need as one way to get more food to people. I think, so thank you. That came from Karen. Karen, thank you for that suggestion. I mean, I would say there are ways people just individually could do some of that. And then there is work happening that's not quite that, but I think is the same idea. And I'll let Kelly talk a little bit more about that. But I mean, on an individual level, it could be that if folks already are doing a CSA for themselves, you have a relationship with a local farm maybe and are buying boxes of produce for the summer, you could always offer to buy an additional one that gets given to someone who maybe couldn't afford it, or to offset the cost for someone else. And that's kind of a individual, one-on-one way to do it. But Kelly, I think there's some larger scale things that are not necessarily CSA, but there's that, is it called Farms to Families project? That I think the state just put more money into, which is going to get boxes of produce from local farms out to food pantries, correct? And so we know that's happening and it's going to ramp up again in our region pretty soon.
Yeah, the governor's office just announced through Connecticut Department of Agriculture, I think it's about $1.5 million throughout the state that will be for partnerships for local farms to be able to, for nonprofits to be able to buy healthy produce from local farms. And so, one of our focus points on that is to partner to make sure that it's getting out into the entire community, kind of going back to what we were talking about before around hitting those with the highest need. And so we partner with Vertical Church to be able to get boxes out. And another example of where we are working to address a gap is one conversation we've had with local pantries is that I'd love it, but I can't pick it up. Or, we don't have the transportation or the staffing to do that, but I'd love it if I could. And so how are we able to support in moving the food where it needs to go so that it can reach those who need it and doesn't go to waste?
Yeah, I asked that question because, as we all know, access to food is one thing, but access to healthy food is
Right.
key. So I know that Common Ground has a CSA, so maybe partnering with local schools and partnerships like that may be a possibility. Just making those connections, and Kelly, you brought up rightfully transportation. How do people get access to it? And I think that's something that I've been wrestling with.
Yeah. And then we also have community gardens, Karen, that, we actually have a lot of volunteers that do through United Way help those gardens out. And Kelly, I think that's part of the conversation too, right? Is making sure the produce from those gardens gets to people who need it, because that's a very local source of healthy food.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was in the coordinated food assistance network meetings that occur. It's been great to have more community garden representatives at the table, because they've really raised the flag to say, it's not just about needing money to buy. How do we support the local gardens and incorporate them as part of the whole infrastructure? So work to come on that.
Do you work at all with Haven's Harvest, which collects food from events and so forth? Of course, that's limited because it only happens periodically. It's not but you do work with them, right?
Yeah, very closely. They're a critical partner in our community to ensure that there's zero food waste is the goal.
Yeah. And Allison, in the chat, had a different Allison, not Allison Batson. We have two Allison. Allison Hoffman had shared in the chat that there are organizations that are already doing some CSA type produce donations. So Congregation Michigan Israel is doing some of that in partnership with the Unitarian Society in Hamden, and making sure things that are grown are getting to local pantries and soup kitchens. So good to know that there are things like that happening throughout the region. I want to be sensitive to time. We had said we were going to take 45 minutes of your day, and we are just about at that time. I really appreciate everyone being on the call, asking such great questions. I want to say a special thank you to Kelly for sharing all of her knowledge and insight, and want to make sure that folks feel connected to those opportunities that we had shared. I'm just wondering, Maria Arnold, are we going to be able to, we could send out some of those links and things, because people might not have gotten them from the chat.
Absolutely. I was just typing in the chat. We will send out a follow-up email with all of the links that we shared today.
Good. Thank you all for all that you do, for all of your support, and we appreciate you so much and look forward to continuing this work together. Hope you have a great day.